Hello friends, how are you? I'm Mari Theriger and today I'm going to talk about the Shamanic Vampire. This is October and the supernatural cycle of this season isn't complete without vampirism. This was in fact a question posed by one of my patrons, Miss Nicole Vernon. Thank you very much. And I swear you guys, my patrons, ask me the strangest questions, and I think it's to provide me with a challenge. By all means, keep them coming, my good friends. I'm always eager for questions that somewhat challenge me, and in all honesty, I don't mind to once in a while step into the realm outside the academic field. The question, in fact, was about human sacrifices related to the blood being used for energy healing. The relation of the blood used as a healing energy or transfer of energy in either human or animal from the sacrificed to the one sacrificing. I think this question leads to the vampire notion on shamanism, and that's what I'm going to explore to, try to answer this question. So, as you can see, this video won't be very academic, as I usually do in this channel, so please do keep that in mind. Furthermore, a few other points must be underlined. I'm going to try to explain something that can hardly be explained with words. The case of vampirism in shamanism, which is in fact what led to the creation of the various myths of vampires, is a rather complex subject which can only be fully understood from the perspective of a shaman who has experienced that. So it's quite personal. It doesn't enter in the collective public or professional life. And anthropology and the comparative study of myths is the best thing we have to explain such things, unless, of course, you are a shaman. And this is a subject directly associated with the spiritual sphere, and each person obviously experiences in their own way the spiritual reality. If a person has no contact with shamanism or with a shaman whatsoever, these subjects tend to be really difficult to explain, which is why I will try my best to explain to you what can hardly be exposed with mere words. And also, this subject enters in the category of what we would call dark shamanism. You see, to a shaman, an actual shaman, there is no distinction, no divisions and categories within the shamanic reality. We just label things and make divisions so that those who are completely outside the shamanic reality may better understand certain subjects. So dark shamanism, which I would like to talk about on a future video, is just a sort of category to understand certain concepts, especially for us, of the so-called Western societies, which have been quite detached from the world of animism. Therefore, it's hard for us to grasp certain realities, especially when we enter on the panorama of the spiritual. So, with this being said, please do try to keep an open mind while I'm trying to explain this subject to you. I know that there will naturally be some criticism. It's perfectly normal, when trying to explain something that belongs to the spiritual, and therefore it's quite a restricted reality to most. So let's get started, and I will wish myself good luck. Good luck! When it comes to archaeology, it's clear that human sacrifices were quite common all over the world. But the use of blood as a source of energy or to provide energy is something else entirely. Human sacrifices or animal sacrifices were offerings. The blood was rarely used for any specific religious activity. It doesn't mean it wasn't used. It just means that it was rarely used when it comes to expressions of faith towards the supernatural. Animals were used to either communicate with the specific deity to whom the animal belonged to, being the animal totem of that specific deity or spirit, or parts of specific animals were used to represent a particular trait of the animal to be embodied into the human, or a specific part for a specific magical purpose. Let me give you a very quick notion of animals in graves, burials, funerary cults. So first, sacrificial animals in burials, in cremation contexts, and the shamanic understanding. In the cremation process, bodies are physically transformed, and combining the bodies of sacrificed animals, a new spiritual entity is created, and the individual embodies the power of the animal. The matter and the spirit are not a separated reality to many ancient civilizations, whose spiritual bases are animistic in nature. In order to release the spiritual form, the matter must be destroyed to release the essence, the power, the force, the making. Cremation is interpreted as transformation, and the most common method of animal sacrifice was cremation. Cremation was probably to infuse the deceased with animal characteristics. Now, animal sacrifices in burial context, but unburnt remains. In a shamanic understanding, unburnt animal sacrifices in burials could mean transportation. We know that shamans evoke animal spirits through a variety of ways, including sacrificing the animals. In burial context, this could mean the animals are the steeds used by the deceased to get the person in the right place to communicate with the right deity or deities, or simply to make the spiritual journey. This may be one of the reasons why horses were the most common animals to be sacrificed as a means of transportation into the afterlife. Now, other reasons for animal sacrifice. Magical arts often used animal sacrifices for a variety of purposes. For instance, in pre-Christian Scandinavia, a cat's head was used to communicate with Freya directly, since it was believed that cats had a special link with Freya. And the head was used because of the belief that the soul existed within the head. In this case, the cat would be used as the vessel to communicate with Freya, using its spirit as a philia, an animal spirit or guide, to contact the goddess. Now, the use of blood in human and animal sacrifices. Blood was rarely used if we compare it with the other funerary and magical cults and activities. I would even say in any pre-Christian society, only 0.05% of religious magical activities used blood as the key ingredient. Even in the case of Rome, animal blood was used quite often, but it was still a rarity when compared with the other religious and cultic activities. Still, animal blood was used, and sometimes human blood. Mostly it was to bless the land or to hallow something or someone, or in the case of the Mesoamerican civilizations, human blood was very much used indeed in celebrations, however, not as much as Hollywood movies portrayed. Those macabre sacrifices occasionally happened, but not in a massive scale. Now, prehistoric cannibalism. In many prehistoric societies, cannibalism was a thing. It still is nowadays in some scattered pockets of tribal groups. Throughout contemporary history, occasionally, there was obviously cannibalism as a means of survival in specific hard times of great famine, such as, for instance, during the 19th century all over Siberia, Finland and Sweden. But in prehistoric times, cannibalism was real, especially during the glacial period. This practice continued even after the end of the last glacial period, throughout the entire Paleolithic. I myself was in an archaeological finding on a late Paleolithic context and early Mesolithic, and human bones were found with marks of scrapping and purposely breaking the bones to eat the marrow. This is an ancient belief that the marrow was the essence of a person, and by consuming the marrow, one would obviously consume the essence of the person to incorporate the essence in one's self. This is the closest to vampirism we get in prehistoric times, consuming someone's marrow to acquire that someone's energy. This type of belief endured throughout history, and here's a possible interpretation why the god Thor, after killing his goats to be consumed, didn't allow anyone to break the goat's bones to eat the marrow. By eating the essence of the goat could not return to its physical shape. And that's exactly where I want to get. Let's try to understand the concept of vampirism as seen in a shamanic perspective. It's very difficult nowadays to explain the vampire myth due to the attempt of separating the genuine folklore and myth from the fiction it inspired. Forget all you know, or think you know, about vampires. All that thing of having no reflections, garlic is awful to them, sleeping in coffins, the sign of the cross makes them burn, and whatnot. The folkloric archetype of the vampire comes closer to the shamanic understanding of a real vampire. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but vampires don't glitter either, as if sparkling little diamonds covered their skins. But there is a long process, obviously, of development on the vampire figure, especially when Christianity was incorporated in pre-Christian folklore, which just increased the superstition around vampires that greatly distorted the previous notions of vampirism. And there are no indications that vampires actually had fangs. For all we know, that's something exclusive from Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is obviously an awesome classic, but due to pop culture, the figure of the vampire got somewhat even more ridiculous. Now, shamanism is the earliest form of religion or human interaction with the spiritual and expression of faith. And it's certainly also a spiritual path that fortunately survived until our contemporary times. Much about shamanism has been studied throughout the past century. Shamanic activities and world perceptions can be found entwined in mythological accounts and folklore. And this helps us to find comparisons, seeking the spiritual origins of the myths and folktales. If we consider to be real the fact that the shaman is able to visit the realm of the dead to consult with the spirits of the ancestors, and that out-of-body experiences are possible, then we might understand what a vampire truly is. In shamanism, death is understood as the great initiation into the mysteries of life. To die before you die is to discover the hidden knowledge, the knowledge provided by the spirits or found by exploring the world of the spirits. In psychology, this often happens as a result of near-death experiences. The shaman doesn't die physically, therefore the shaman doesn't physically visit the underworld. Shamanic death is the death of the psychological self, is to be in between. The shaman, like the vampire, has been to the abode of the deceased and returned. Now, the acquisition of shamanic abilities was often the result of serious illness, sensory deprivation, near-death experiences, and such. Shamanic initiation rituals typically involved suffering, actual near-death, and rebirth. The study of the vampire tradition and folklore, particularly of Eastern Europe, which seems to maintain more of the shamanic traditions in their folktales about vampires than any other country, yields clues to the shamanic nature of the vampire, which we will see further ahead. In a shamanic perspective, there is a life force, which is a unique part of every individual, and it is important that every person has their own life force in them. To the Norse, for instance, it was called magin. This life force can be manifested outside the body, and as such, it manifests itself into the spiritual, where other forces reside, spiritual forces. In a shamanic sense, a vampire is someone who actively feeds upon this very energy, this manifestation of a person, the essence of a person. There is a certain link here between vampires and the out-of-body flight of the shaman. And I urge you to watch or re-watch my video about Norse spirituality, the parts of the self, as well as the video about magin, which I will leave the links in the description of this video, as well as in the video itself. A sort of little list of videos that might help you to better understand this subject. Because what I'm going to say next might be a little bit complex without the basic understandings of the parts of the self and its various spiritual divisions. Again, I reinforce that I'm talking about in a shamanic perspective of the spiritual. So, in a shamanic sense, there is no need to be corporeal in order to be alive. I mean, to be alive in a flesh body, you don't need to be corporeal. It's possible to live in a shamanic archetype way of being incorporeal and still drawing breath, walk about, and have physical shape. Incorporeal isn't the same thing as being a spirit or a ghost. There is the possibility to own a physical body, but being incorporeal gives the person the same abilities of that of a ghost, being ethereal. In other words, a spiritual being is able to reside in a body. Such is the nature of the Draugr from Norse mythology, for instance. This myth has in it a very shamanic understanding of the division of the parts of the self. The Likre is the physical body, just the husk, the vessel. This physical body without the other parts of the self is nothing. It's just a body. It's just matter. This matter can be inhabited by spiritual entities. Could be yourself, your own spiritual self, or could be of another. The Draugr is similar to the Revenant, a visible ghost or animated corpse that was believed to return from the grave to terrorize the living. After physical death, the Likre, the body as a husk, could be inhabited by a spiritual entity. This is what gave origins to the restless dead, in a certain way, the animation of the body. I have a video that somewhat touches that subject, which is necromancy in Norse religion, if I'm not mistaken. In Eastern Europe, we don't have a Draugr, but we have a Strigoi. Strigoi are commonly understood as being vampires, but throughout the years they became the Hollywood vampires, and to us they lost much of their shamanic understanding. The real Strigoi, real as in without the Hollywood influence, don't really have a form, even though they look normal. They possess a body, a physical existence, just like everyone else. But these beings are the shamanic sense of the shaman itself who lives in between. It feeds on the essence of others, on the energy of others. Strigoi takes energy. This is vampirism, true vampirism in a shamanic perspective, to feed off of one's energy and not blood. To live in a body but being able to shift into the spiritual and reside there, because the spiritual self can be divided into parts. The same thing as in various activities within Seidr, to manifest one's mind into a form and send it forth, to shapeshift, change of Hamre in the spiritual reality, to place one's mind into his or her Filgia, spiritual companion or guiding spirit, etc. In short words, after you watch the previous videos I've mentioned, you will understand this better. If one is aware of the different parts of himself or herself and knowing how to manifest ourselves in those parts, we are able to live in between. The vampire, in a shamanic sense, is just this, a spiritual entity capable of living in between, but spends its existence mainly outside the physical reality. And therefore, to continue to be alive, it has to feed on others' energies. Life force. In other words, it's a shaman who transcended beyond physical manifestation and spends most of its existence as a non-corporeal being. But the shaman isn't dead. The shaman is still linked to its physical body, but in order to exist in the spiritual reality, must feed on something. Just as we consume a variety of things to keep us going, the shamanic vampire feeds on energy, on life force. I know this sounds completely mental, but please, do keep an open mind. I'm trying my best to explain this. A vampire is someone who had a shamanic physical death, but instead of residing in its body, decided to reside in the spiritual world. But it's still attached to its body, so it's able to manifest itself in the physical world through its body. This isn't the same thing as actual death, when a person dies and detaches itself from its body. The shamanic vampire was able to have a continuous link with the physical body, the likre, but his spiritual self is on the spiritual existence. To live in this existence like that, one must also feed the spiritual self with others' essence. This is why you commonly read in folklore about vampires that they are undead, neither dead nor alive, but someone who is both here and on the other side. The shaman is able to manifest its mind in the spiritual world, but still return to its body in the physical world. A vampire shaman did the exact same, but chose to live in the spiritual world without being dead, still maintaining a link with the physical world. The body of this vampire shaman gradually loses its matter and becomes ethereal, but it's still able to act in the physical world because its owner maintains the link. If we look at the vampire archetype in terms of shamanism, then the appeal as a spiritual symbol becomes immediately clear. Having undergone an initiatory death and rebirth, the shaman is not undead but twice born. The shaman is no longer part of proper society, but is instead an outsider, belonging neither here nor there. As an inhabitant of neither the world of the living nor that of the dead, the shaman is then free to traverse all of the worlds, a walker between worlds. The shaman exists in a transcendent state betwixt and between. The shamanic vampire is the exact same thing, but feeds upon energy, life force. And so I think like this, I have answered the question of my patron in relation to sucking energy, not through blood, as we commonly understand in vampires, which then leads us to believe in blood sacrifices to draw, release, consume, or pass on energy, but through this shamanic perspective of acquiring energy to live on. Blood was indeed believed by tribal cultures to contain the soul. The blood of a brave enemy or admired animal was drunk to bestow upon the drinker the positive attributes of the vanquished man or creature. The magical significance of blood is considerable. For instance, the blood of a sacrificed animal was often drunk in order to produce inspirational effects or a communion with the gods. We have historical mentions that lamb's blood was drunk at the temple of Apollo at Argos, or the priestess of the earth drank bull's blood at Aegina in Achaia. The goddess Kali descended upon the priest who drank the blood of a sacrificial goat in India. Every Sunday, the blood of Christ is drunk in churches around the world, obviously now as wine, but it used to be a Roman tradition of drinking the blood of the sacrificed bull and bathe in it. And the shamans of the Akomawi in America would drink the blood of the sick. The sickness was said to be contained within the blood, and so the shaman claimed his helping spirits, Damagomi, are thirsty, so he swallows the blood of the sick in return for their guidance. So, yes, indeed, we see that the drinking of blood is an integral part of the shaman's activities, as well as those of the vampire. However, the consumption of blood was not to acquire energy, as previously stated. A vampiric way of acquiring energy was through the very consumption of essence in the spiritual reality. In shamanic terms, drinking blood is an activity of the physical reality and for a variety of purposes, from fertility, to bless, to hallow, to heal, to call upon a deity, for divination or a means of ecstatic trance, but not to draw energy from others to one's self. That kind of activity belonged to the spiritual reality, to the vampire shaman, as previously demonstrated. Even though my demonstration seems quite fantastical. Not at all academic, I'm afraid, and I am well aware of that. Alright, my dear friends, I do hope you have enjoyed this video and that in some way it was useful. I'll leave down below in the description a couple of videos, mostly on the pre-Christian Scandinavian perspective of the spiritual, that might help you to better understand a lot of ideas expressed in today's video. So, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. Enjoy the rest of October, and please don't go out there drinking someone else's blood. It's quite dangerous these days. You never know what diseases you might earn as a reward for the stupidity of fantasizing about living the life of a vampire from pop culture. Try to live an incorporeal existence instead. It's safer. Dá por aí, não?